This
everyone.
conference will now be recorded.
All right, so let's get started. As Don mentioned, this is the Emergency Connectivity Fund discussion. And as we get into the detail, you'll understand why basically your state E-rate coordinator is giving you this information. And Don also mentioned earlier, some of you may have heard, right now we don't have all the information. One of my colleagues made the comment on one of our calls the other day that we're going to stay within the four corners of what we know. All right, and I like that. So again, you may have questions today that we don't have answers for yet. And again, you'll understand when we talk about the quick turnaround, how the FCC came up with these rules. All right, so today we're talking about this is what we know as of this minute. All right, so the Emergency Connectivity Fund, okay, or the ECF. So this is part of the American Rescue Plan that Congress passed on March 11th. And within that plan, there was a set aside of $7.171 billion to provide for emergency off-campus connectivity. So this is being handled by the FCC under basically the E-rate process. So again, that's why I'm talking about it. Right. So the seven, I've been saying this almost daily, so bear with me, $7.17 billion. It will pay for internet connections as well as the end user device. Basically the items that E-rate, historically has never covered. All right, so again, this is a separate fund, ECF, to pay for those non-E-rate services. So this will be a reimbursement to both schools and libraries. All right, now as I go through this, I will mention the schools just so you understand the impact, how this is going to work on both sides. So when this plan, all right, when the American Rescue Plan, was issued, the FCC was given 60 days to enact the regulations on how the program will work. And what they came up with within that 60 days was pretty amazing. I mean, for such a short turnaround, they put questions out there, asking for comments, for replies, how should this work? And then taking those suggestions and putting this ECF plan together. All right, but again, with that, very quick turnaround, that's why we have some gaps, pieces of information that we need clarification on. All right, so again, due to that pretty quick turnaround. So as I mentioned, the funds do fall under the federal E-rate program. So bottom line, if you qualify for E-rate, you qualify to apply for ECF. Even if, you may be a library that's never requested E-rate, all right? And that's okay, but by definition, because you meet the definition of a library in our state, then you would qualify for ECF. Now, the application window, it's going to be treated very similar to what we see with the Form 471 window when we apply for E-rate. Again, just a much more abbreviated time frame. So there's going to be a application window that will last 45 days. And earlier we were being told, expecting it to open late June. Now we're pushing that back, late June, maybe even, early July. All right, so this first window will have the 45 days to make application for any proactive requests. All right, covering July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. Basically, it's going to follow the same, time period as this upcoming E-rate funding year. All right, so again, this is for those proactive requests. And as I go through this, please don't hesitate to ask questions. But like I said, there may be questions I don't have answers for. I'll let you know that. And then as we get updates, we can push those out. All right, so just to explain some of the fund differences. So both E-rate and ECF, they fall under what's called the Schools and Libraries program. All right, the difference though is that with E-rate, E-rate is a discount program covering when we look at category 1 cost. Category 1 is the bandwidth, the connectivity, to our buildings. So E-rate covers 20 to 90% of that cost. All right, and then for the folks that maybe are new to E-rate, that discount percentage, it's based on wherever the main library is located, the school district. All right, within that footprint. All right, so whatever the school district's discount rate is, based on their student enrollment and their national school lunch program eligibility. Whatever that school district qualifies for, that's the percentage that the library system qualifies. All right, but again, covering a portion of that. E-rate, though, provides for internet and Wi-Fi on campus, all right, on the library site. All right, the big difference here with ECF is it's going to cover 100% of the eligible cost. And again, for the things that E-rate typically, does not cover, the off-campus or off-premise internet access and connected devices. And this would be for school staff. We've gotten some clarification here when the order mentions staff. It would be for, say, the staff that in a school situation providing the online learning, students, and then, of course, library patrons. All right, so again, ECF covering 100% of the cost. I want to make you aware, you may have heard this already, but a different program that's out there, and this is considered a consumer program. With E-rate and ECF, it's the library system that has to file the applications. This consumer program called EBB, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, this is something where the household would have to apply. But it would be wonderful if you share this with your patrons to let them know. And I know I've heard from a lot of libraries that are already putting the word out there. In some cases, having local vendors come in or providers come in and, basically to get patrons signed up, all right, which would be wonderful. But EBB is a discount service for low income households. It will provide internet and a connected device for the home. As far as internet, it will cover up to $50 per month. Connected device, it would basically up to $100 for the device, right? So the household must apply, right? Again, the school or library cannot do that on their behalf. And let's see, Hannah, you're asking the question, are these initial setup costs, or does it also cover the monthly cost for hotspots and tablets? Excellent question, because this past year with COVID, we saw lots of libraries, up the number of hotspots or tablets that they had available for patrons to check out. So it will cover that monthly recurring cost. All right, so if you already have the hotspots, you don't need to increase that, but you do need that monthly recurring cost. It will cover that. All right, so it's a great question. Now, as we go through the presentation, there is a state level group. It's called our Connectivity Champions. It's through the Management Council. I'm going to provide their link. They're working actively with families, with households to get them signed up, to get the information out, and it's an excellent resource. So again, I'll be sharing their URL if it's something that you'd like to share with patrons.
That's a very good idea, Lori, because the Connectivity Champions, I think, have a lot more practice of helping people find the programs that are available to them locally, because that varies wildly based on where you live, of which providers can give access, as well as the various means that families have of certifying their own eligibility. The schools actually have access to much more data than we do to help with that. So thanks for giving a plug to the Connectivity Champions. They're great.
They are wonderful, and I've had a number of them. There's actually 18 individuals, okay, that are champions around the state. And as Don mentioned, it depends on the location as to which internet providers are participating. And so they're working closely with those providers to make those connections. So yeah, we've had some of the champions on the webinars that I've conducted, and great resource in our state. All right, as far as eligible services, eligible locations, it's anywhere remote access is needed. We obviously think the home, but it could be a community center, it could be a homeless shelter. All right, so basically wherever that need is, where you could either provide a fixed internet connection, or in most cases the hotspots. Now, one thing with this, we talk about EBB, these various programs, that there cannot be duplication. All right, so if an individual is getting a hotspot funded through EBB, basically it would be a duplication for you to also provide the hotspot. So when we go through, as we talk through some of this, there are some certifications when you go to file, or certifications that you'll put in your acceptable use policy, all right, where the patron will basically sign off saying, this is not a duplication, all right. But again, we'll talk more about that, all right. But again, this is eligible anywhere remote access is needed. This also includes school buses and bookmobiles. Now, don't confuse this when we talk about bookmobiles, where a hotspot is already eligible for a bookmobile under the current E-rate program, whenever you need that hotspot to conduct library business, all right? Because I've gotten the question from folks, should we basically cancel the E-rate request for that hotspot? Do not do that, all right? Let E-rate cover that. Because we already know that one is eligible, all right? But then if you want to put a more robust Wi-Fi on that bookmobile, where when you park it in, say, a community centers or a homeless shelter's parking lot, all right, that you can provide, it's providing that access, all right, to those individuals. And Rushi, your question, do we know how long they'll be funded? Is there a limit? Right now, we don't know. It depends on how long the funds last. If after this very first round, this first window, if all $7.17 billion, if it's exhausted, then it's done. All right, so it's this very, finite amount of funding. It says it will go until 1 year after the pandemic has been lifted, up to 2030. It could be done after first year. All right, so it's kind of a wait and see. All right, so again, putting that more extensive Wi-Fi on a bookmobile, this would be eligible. Now, network build-outs, in the ECF order, it talks about, as far as a build-out, that is only allowed if there's no commercial service being offered. All right, because the intent here is the FCC does not want to basically take business away from those current providers. For the library or the school system, to put, more robust Wi-Fi that could basically, provide service, to a number of communities, all right, so that those community members then disconnect the current service that they have to use this free service. All right, so the build out would only be for pockets of the community where there is no commercial service being offered. All right, and you have to.
Can I add something? Can I add something here?
Yes, please.
If, as a library, you are thinking of using, ECF funds for some kind of build out, whether that was like a municipal broadband project, you can't, if there is a commercial provider, you can't use these funds for that, as Lori said. But there are other ARPA funds coming to local governments. Those aren't coming to schools and libraries directly, but they may be coming to the state of Ohio for disbursement to county and municipal governments. And so I would reach out to make connections with your local government to talk about the projects that you have in mind, because the cities and towns, counties may have some funds coming to them that they're looking for projects.
Thanks, John. That's an excellent point, because again, I've heard from some library systems, that have been working with, the local government, looking at, can we use ECF? And again, ECF not being able to do that, but make use of those other funds, most definitely. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so ineligible services, keep in mind, if it's something that is eligible for E-rate, it's not eligible for ECF. Another question that I'm getting is, we need to add, more access points within our buildings. All right, well, that's eligible under E-rate. All right, so if E-rate will fund it, okay, it would not be eligible under ECF. And Lisa's question, does this rule out pushing the library Wi-Fi out into the community using TV white space? Lisa, that's my understanding. All right, and that was a question that we had asked the FCC. If it's going to basically replace, a commercial service, that this would also be ineligible. All right, but again, great question. All right, but again, if it's something that, E-rate category 1 or category 2 funding would cover, ECF, all right, would not fund that. Now, as far as the broadband service, so give me just a second. Rebecca's question, so an outdoor access point at the library would not be eligible for ECF. That is correct, because the outdoor access point on the library property is eligible under category 2. All right, so again, if it's something that is you're going to put on the outside of the building so that patrons can come and sit in the parking lot, that is something that E-rate would cover, all right, to basically provide the access on the library premise. Right. So as far as the services that are eligible and quantities, you're welcome, Rebecca. Thanks for the question. It's 1 hotspot per user or 1 fixed connection per home. All right. So again, if this is a question that we asked the FCC, what if a patron comes in and they say they need 3 hotspots because there are multiple individuals within the household that need the access? Maybe it's 2 hotspots and 2 end-user devices, a tablet or a laptop. All right. Again, that would be fine as long as they're signing off saying, yes, this is, per individual. All right. We mentioned the monthly recurring cost. So if you already have those hotspots, maybe you signed a 2-year contract that will cover this upcoming year. All right. Again, that recurring cost would be eligible. You would need to show this is what we're currently paying. If you have 500 hotspots, times $40 a month, whatever, you just show that cost. Now,
Lori, we have a question I think that you missed from Sandy Thompson. What if commercial service does not meet the minimum established definition of broadband? As my reading, ECF is not wading into that quagmire.
That is correct, and I apologize, I did miss that question. That is my understanding. And I've gotten that question from schools saying, well, yeah, there's access in the area, but it's not sufficient. One of the things that I'm recommending, because there's so much unknown at this point, basically put it on this new 471, ask for it, but wait until you get a funding decision to actually move forward. The only thing, and again, I've repeated this, some of you've sat in on some of the other webinars that I've conducted. The only thing I know absolutely for sure right now is if you don't fill out the application, submit the application, you're not going to get funded. Outside of that, I feel like there's very little that I know for sure. But that's my understanding. If you make the argument that it's not sufficient, that one is very iffy as to whether that would get funded or not. Okay. Now, as far as standards for speed and service, the FCC initially asked, should they set these standards? And with the pushback, again, this is nationwide, and for them to say, here's the minimum standard, there may be pockets, of the country that can't meet that standard. So then by definition, it's, well, then you don't qualify for ECF. So they came back and said, okay, there will not be a minimum standard. All right. Now, as far as the equipment goes, there is a cap for the per unit device. All right, as far as that cost. So if you are purchasing the hotspots, I know a lot of the providers, the Verizons and AT&Ts and so on, typically provide the Wi-Fi for free as part of that monthly recurring service, or there's some portion of that monthly recurring that covers that hotspot. But if you are purchasing the hotspot outright, the max that it will cover is $250 per device. So if you decide to go with a little more robust device at $300, you can basically purchase that, but the overage, that extra $50, will be out of pocket. The max ECF will cover will be the $250. If the implementation requires a modem or a router, or it could be basically a combination device that provides both functionalities, that would be eligible. And then laptops or tablets. So it could be, a traditional laptop, a Chromebook, it could be an iPad, all right? But the max per device that ECF will cover is $400, all right? So again, if you decide to go with a $500 device, that $100 overage is out of pocket. And Carrie, give me a second. Your question here, do we need to track the devices once issued to patrons? Does the library own them, and do they need to be returned to the library? Okay, a couple of things here. The library would own them, all right? So you would need to keep basically track of that inventory. That would be part of your, your inventory assets. And you have to show that you maintain ownership, all right, for a working device for up to 3 years. After 3 years, you can dispose of them, you can sell them, whatever your local rules allow for, all right? But you do need to track the devices, basically who has that device. Okay, and Don, if you want to weigh in, because I know these are some discussions right now with ALA, as far as keeping that historical information, who you lent these devices out to.
Right. This is a bone of contention with ALA, because the rules from the FCC are fairly clumsy and are requiring a level of personal information about library borrowers that libraries are not comfortable with, and which local policies and state law are not always very comfortable with. What we are hearing initially from USAC, who again is simply implementing the program, not creating the rules, is that their understanding is this kind of compliance with inventory tracking is self-certification and will only become an issue during an audit of that, at which case the library can choose what level, based on their own policy of revealing patron information, they are able to or are willing to part with. For most of us, that's usually bring me a subpoena. So that is kind of where it is. There are also issues. Sorry, Lori, while I've been monitoring things, my attention may have slipped, but there is also a requirement in the program of a certification of need. And we're still waiting from ALA of exactly what their recommendation for libraries is there, but patrons may need, before borrowing, say, a hotspot, to sign a statement saying that they do need it, that it's that it's not a duplication of services that they're getting or something like that, and how long we would have to hang on to those individual records is up for debate. The main point that USAC says, it's basically inventory control, track that you have it, and what happened to it. But while if you check it out through your integrated library system, usually those do not, by design, keep detailed information of when the history of when each patron checks out and returns, something like that. So stay tuned for details on that. That may be a level of record keeping and then possible intrusion into patron privacy that, as libraries, we're not willing to do for the funding that's available. Is that Weasley enough?
It sounds like the story of my life right now. So all the answers, non-answers, but yeah, that was excellent. And I've gotten the same questions, from on the school side, where a family fills out information, with student names, and schools are not allowed to put those, that personal identified information. And so I tend to liken that to when the households fill out the National School Lunch Programs application, where it's asking for income info, where during an audit, an auditor can say, well, show me the copies of the completed forms. And it has always been the rule that, any names, any personal, identification there, that we redact that. we're not allowed to give you, those household names. So again, stay tuned. All right, so let us know if you do have questions, additional questions that we cannot answer today, but please keep the questions coming, because then we can take those back to the FCC, to ALA, to USAC for clarification. All right, a couple of other points here on the laptops or tablets. It is the one device per user allowed, but again, a patron can come in and ask for multiple tablets, for individuals within the household. All right, but the fund does not allow, there's no allowance for breakage or spares. All right, so if you come up with, this is how we determined our need, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here this morning. But if you determine we need 1,000 hotspots and 1,000 laptops or tablets, you cannot ask for 1,050 to have additional 50 because of breakage and spares. That might be a little easier for the libraries as compared to a school, where the student takes that device home, to use throughout the school year. But again, if you are looking at having those additional just to sit on the shelf for breakage, should there be any spares, or you need spares, not allowed. Smartphones, I don't see that being an issue for schools or desktops, sending those out with patrons. All right, let's see a question here. So can the funds be used to add to our existing Wi-Fi hotspot circulating collection, or are these devices loaned given separately? No, these can just be added to your existing inventory. All right, so when we talk about need, one of the things that the FCC shared was, well, how did you determine need, last year? All right, so when you look at, what was the demand for hotspots or devices, during COVID, during shutdown, I should say. All right, how many were you loaning out? What kind of wait list did you have? And you can, as a library, you can use that to help determine the need. All right, and let's see, question. So if a patron loses an item, do we charge them for the lost item? That is a local decision. How do you handle that? And again, I've gotten that same question on the school side. Is that something that your insurance would cover? For the inventory, you would want to make note, that it has disappeared. The patron did not return it, but just keep note of, here's the status of that device. Again, that's what we're being told right now. Let's see, Cassandra's question. No, so these, as far as being new items, or to reimburse for the existing items. So if you already have the hotspots, and you don't need to add more devices, you just need that monthly recurring service cost covered, ECF can be used for that. All right, so Cassandra, let me make sure if I understood your question correctly. And let's see, Paula's questions, can funds be used for devices to be used in-house, such as computer lab, or do the devices have to be made available for circulation? They have to be made available for circulation. These cannot be devices that you would use in-house, because again, remember, E-rate covers your internet access in-house. Under E-rate, devices are not eligible. All right, so if you want to, again, you cannot use, have it basically on-premise use. So sorry if I stumbled over that, but Paula, let me know if that answered your question. And Bill's question, I'm wondering how we'll even be able to determine the amount of devices to purchase. For hotspots, we can see our inventory, sorry, bumping up here, and hold ratio, but for purchasing laptops, I have no clue. And Bill, that's a very good point. With the schools, they can send a survey, to the home, and they can answer based on that household. Libraries really can't do that. You could come up with basically an estimation, and that's the best that we can do right now. All right, estimate, how many hotspots are you sending out? Make the assumption, does each hotspot also need the corresponding device? But again, we really don't know for sure the best way to determine that for a library. And John, if you've heard anything different, please let me know. Please chime in there. And Eric's question, we don't actually buy hotspots, we pay our vendor a monthly fee. Does that count, or do we have to use these funds to purchase equipment? No, Eric, if you're, Again, most of the Wi-Fi service that we see, it's the hotspot is just included as part of that service cost. So you do not have to show that you purchased the hotspot separately. All right, it could be just, here's this monthly recurring cost, and that includes the use of the hotspot. All right, Patty's question, can we use these for library staff to take to public events and take when they travel to work events? I'm thinking on that one, Patty.
I think no.
That's my knee jerk, because the FCC has been very adamant when we talk about school staff, that the school superintendent or principal would not qualify, even though they're off premise, conducting school business. So by the same token, that would apply for library staff.
I think the kind of the question to ask yourself is to go back to the intent of this, and the intent of this money that the FCC is coming back to on it is that this is specifically for the homework gap. We can't distinguish in public libraries whether or not somebody is using this specifically for homework, but that is the intent. Often we're doing it for, like, the homework as one of the general necessary broadband necessary activities that a family may have, including interaction with e-government, workforce services, those kind of things. But it really does come down to homework. So when you're thinking of it in terms of that, library staff taking to public events, it's not really about the homework gap.
Thanks, Don, and that is correct. And and in some of the discussions that I've been in, when we talk about that being used for an educational purpose, yes, it could be an adult, applying for a job, needing access for that reason. But again, the focus is that the educational purpose. Dan, your question about a 5G hotspot. That would be fine, because again, the FCC is not setting standards. All right, they're not setting, you got to be, it has to be within a certain speed. So if you have, if you're purchasing the 5G hotspot, that would be fine. As far as the monthly recurring cost, there is no cap on that monthly cost. It just has to be reasonable. And this is something that USAC, they have a database where they can go in and look at the various cellular providers, what did they charge, for specific regions for that monthly recurring cost. So what I've seen, over the years, it's typical, about $40 a month. So if you have a vendor that's suddenly charging 3 times that, all right, $120 a month, that would throw up red flags. It has to be that reasonable cost, right? So again, make sure let me know if I did not answer the question fully. See, Deanna, your question, we have Bookmobile that we use to provide materials and outreach to the community. Can we purchase a device to provide internet that would be reimbursed under this program? If this is a device to basically conduct library business, that is eligible under E-rate. All right, so my answer to that would be no. If you're putting Wi-Fi that would serve library patrons, like I said, if it's, you're sitting in a community center's parking lot, and the purpose is to give those individuals access to internet while there, that would be eligible. All right, but because E-rate already covers the connection for the Bookmobile to provide, the library service, that would not be eligible under ECF. Thank you for the questions, very much appreciated. All right, so we've talked about this initial filing window. It'll be a 45-day application period. And again, we're expecting it to open in late June. I was on a call yesterday with USAC, and basically USAC is taking the information. So the forms had to be tweaked, all right, to make it fit within the ECF requirements. And those fields, the recommended fields, the data that we gathered, that has since been approved. And so now USAC is taking that to create the forms. All right, it depends on how long it's going to take USAC to get that completed. So we're guessing right now the window will open late June, early July. All right, that's the best that we know right now. Again, this is going to be a proactive window for purchases made July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. So once the demand is known, all right, they're going to look at all the applications, what's the total request being made, how much, if there's any funds remaining. If that is the case, then a second window will be opened, but it's up to the FCC to set the window type. They have the option to do a second window for new purchases, or it could be a retroactive purchase. If I had to guess, if I'm looking in a crystal ball, my guess would be that the second window would be the retroactive. Don't know that for sure. But if we do get a retroactive filing window, it will be for the services items purchased from March 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. All right, so if we do have the retroactive, and keep in mind, again, you cannot, this cannot be a duplication of service. So if you used other, other funds, such as, the CARES Act, the ESSER monies, things like that, if you use those funds to pay for any of those services, you cannot then go back and have ECF also cover that. And Carrie's question, do we know how long it will take to receive funding approval after the application is submitted? With E-rate, this can be a long time. Carrie, just hold on a second, we'll talk about that, because the FCC did state goals that they expect USAC to work under. All right, so we will discuss that. All right, so basically we're just going to keep getting windows until all of the $7.17 billion has been depleted. All right, so like I said, we have no idea. We may just get the one round, depending on the demand. Now, USAC, basically, they're the folks who will administer this for the FCC, just like they do for E-rate. One of the things that we did find out yesterday on our call with USAC is they're going to have a separate division to handle ECF. It will not be the same individuals that handle the E-rate applications, all right? Because again, that was one of our concerns, that there's still a lot of folks waiting on funding decisions for this upcoming funding year under E-rate. So we asked the FCC and USAC, so does that mean you're going to be pulling reviewers off of our E-rate applications to work on ECF? And they assured us that would not be the case. All right, they're going to have a totally different division that will handle ECF, all right, within USAC. But where possible, they will be using the E-rate portal in forms. So as I mentioned, there will be a version of the Form 471. And several of my colleagues within the state E-rate coordinators group, they basically have gone through the beta of the suggested form. And they said that it does look very much like the existing 471, all right, with some obvious differences there to handle ECF. All right, so we'll use the 471 to ask for the service of the devices. And then there will be an application such as the BEAR form that we currently use to get the reimbursement. There will be new certifications that will be added, specifically around ECF requirements. All right, things like, yes, I certified there's no duplication, based on, what my patrons have said, Cipa Compliance, and so on. All right. One of the things that we have been told on the 471, there will be a narrative where you'll need to explain how you determine need. All right. So again, the FCC has said, you can use, the historical data from this past year, how many hotspots went out, what was that demand? We can use that. All right, but you need to be prepared to explain how you determine that need. Now, a big difference here compared to E-rate is there is no bidding requirements. All right, so you don't need to file a Form 470, wait that minimum 28 days, and so on. But what the FCC stated in the order is that if you have any state or local procurement rules, you do have to follow those. And that will be one of those additional certifications that, yes, we followed all of our state and local procurement rules. All right, so depending on the amount that you're requesting, if you have a requirement that you have to get 3 bids or 3 quotes, you would have to do that. All right, so again, there will not be a 470, the 28-day waiting period, but you must observe any state or local procurement rules. And Fred, one question here, give me a second. We purchased our hotspots through TechSoup and paid for a year contract through Mobile Beacon for the hotspot. If I'm understanding this correctly, we can allocate that yearly contract fee toward ECF. That is correct. All right, so again, you can, if you already have that. And another point here, and I'm getting ahead of my slides, that another big difference from, comparing ECF and E-rate, with E-rate, the service provider has to go through the process to get an identification number. With ECF, that identification number will not be required. All right, so it could be a local vendor that you're currently working with that, that they currently do not participate in E-rate. Again, that's not going to be an issue. If you choose to purchase from Amazon, all right, Amazon does not have a SPIN, a service provider identification number, but you could choose to purchase service from them. All right, thanks, Fred. Now, the way the funding, again, this is what we're being told currently, USAC will wait until the end of that 45-day application window. Then they're going to look at the demand, basically add up all of the requests, all right, before they start basically funding applications. They need to know, are we within that $7.17 billion? Did it exceed it? If it exceeded it, then how do they determine who gets funded and who does not? All right. Now, to Carrie's question about as far as, how quick will we get funding decisions, the FCC has set the goal that 50% of what we call workable applications, right, meaning you didn't make some big mistake on the form. All right, the goal is to have those funded within 60 days. And then 70% to be funded within 100 days. So again, this has a very quick, they're really pushing for this quick turnaround because, when we file the 471, you may state that you want 1,000 hotspots. But then once you get into the process, maybe you decide we're only going to go with 750. So you're not using the full allocation that you requested. All right, so they're pushing for this quick turnaround so that if you ask for X amount for devices, but you spent, you spent less, then they know that they're going to have that access to put back into the fund for another window. All right, so again, that's why they're pushing to get this turned around fairly quickly. Now, if the demand does exceed that $7.17 billion, then they're going to treat this. Some of you might remember the old priority 2 process in E-rate, where things like access points, routers, switches were eligible before we had the category 2 budget, where they would start at the highest discount rate and work backwards until they ran out of funds. That's what this is going to turn into if the demand exceeds that 7.17 billion. All right, so the way they will determine priority, it's going to be based on 2 things. Your E-rate discount rate, they're going to use the discount rate basically as a score, because remember, ECF covers 100% of the cost. And Don, thank you for posting that. Don just posted breaking news. ALA has just updated their ECF page. All right, so we all want to make sure to go out there and check that for any changes. Like
Let me read that out loud for the recording. The ALA's ECF webpage is ala.org/advocacy/ECF. All ECF are in caps.
Perfect, thank you. But yes, this information right now, I mean, it's very fluid. I have to keep going back and correcting myself, because one day I'll say, well, we know today this is what's going on, and tomorrow, we may have a different understanding based on clarifications. All right, so yes, we definitely want to check that to see if there's any changes. All right, so again, as far as the priority, then we'll use the E-rate discount rate to determine your ECF priority score. All right, if you are in a rural location, then your discount rate or score will basically have a 5% bump in priority. All right, so what this means is if you're in a rural location, right, if you have a rural designation, and the rural designation, that's something that we already see in the E-rate world, and it's based on census data. It will look at the zip code for each of your branch locations, each of your library locations, and let's say you have 10 locations, 6 of those locations, the zip code is designated as rural, right? Whatever the majority, then your entire library system, all right, would have that rural designation. So go back, look at the E-rate, designation and the discount rate. So if you are at a 90% discount, all right, and you're in a rural location, then instead of a 90%, you're going to get a priority score of 95%. So those locations are golden, all right? They will get funded first. And then they'll step down to the urban location. So the 90% discount rate at, in an urban location will get funded second. And then your question, do I need to submit forms for each branch locations? No. It should work. And again, I'm basing this on what I know about E-rate. You can file a single application and say this is going to serve, each of my branch locations. All right. But again, it should be handled one application for all of the library system. All right. So to show you what this looks like. All right, so when we look at, this is just the E-rate discount matrix. So if the school district where the main library resides, if that school district, if 75 to 100% of the students within that district qualify for the National School Lunch Program, then if you're in an urban area versus rural, all right, we can see that for the rural, you're going to have that score of 95. The urban location would have a score of 90. Then we go to the next level there in the discount matrix. And if you currently have an 80% discount rate for E-rate and you're in a rural location, then your priority score will be 85 and so on. All right. So again, just go back and look at, what is your current E-rate discount percentage and are you designated urban or rural? And that'll let you know where you fall. Now, the questions I'm getting is, well, how low will they go? We have no idea, all right? Absolutely none at all, and I can't even guess. I did pull the 2020 funding year E-rate information, basically all applicants in the state. And then I sorted it by, are you rural or urban, 90%, and then if you're rural, you got that 5% bump. If you want to just take a look at it and see where you fall in that priority list. When I say all, I have heard from a couple of applicants saying, I'm not listed there and I'm not sure why, all right? But 99.5% of applicants are captured there, all right? But again, it's out on my website at www.ohio-k12.help/ECF and then the ECF-resource-library. All right, but again, it's located out there. Now, as far as actually getting the funds, I mentioned that the process will use a BEAR form. Now, in the E-rate world, BEAR stands for Billed Entity Applicant Reimbursement. All right, so with E-rate, it's that you file the BEAR form, once the service has been received, you pay the invoice, and then USAC would reimburse you whatever your discount percentage. Here with ECF, if you say we spent $70,000 on devices, here's my invoice, they're going to reimburse you that $70,000, all right, providing you receive that funding letter for the full amount. All right, so again, similar to E-rate, keep in mind that you may purchase prior to the ECF funding decision, but if this is something that you're only going to purchase, maybe adding those additional tablets or laptops, if you're only going to purchase those, if you get funded, I know it's kind of, I'm saying a no-brainer, but you want to make sure that you wait for that funding decision. Otherwise, it's a gamble. All right, you may purchase it and then it's going to be out of pocket. Another big difference here between E-rate and ECF. One of the things that we shared with the FCC was that, most schools or libraries cannot afford to carry the project cost, to pay for this upfront, to allocate those funds. So one of the things that we're going to be allowed to do, and do we call this a pre-reimbursement, a pre-bursement? All right, basically you can submit It could be a contract, it could be purchase order for the hardware. You can submit that, once you get a funding decision, you can submit that purchase order, all right, get reimbursed even though you've not actually received or paid for the services. They basically will reimburse you up front. All right, but keep in mind that if you go through the process, you get the reimbursement, then you're going to have to show that you sent the money on to the provider within 30 days. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot from the schools, right now with the shortage of a lot of the technology, where they may place an order and it might be 4 months, all right, before they receive it. So what you could do is you get the funding decision, you can go ahead and order it, wait for the vendor to say, okay, they should be able to give you some date when they think that they should be getting that equipment. Wait until 15 days, 30 days before you're receiving the equipment and file the bearer form. All right, because otherwise, and again, pushback that I've heard from schools, but if I go ahead and file the bearer form, I get the reimbursement, I have to send it to the vendor in 30 days, but it might be 4 months before I get the hardware. Well, then you have no choice but to wait to ask for the funds, or you go ahead and send it to the vendor. They sit on the money for the 4 months, all right? But if you file the form, get the funds, you got to send it on within the 30 days, all right? One of the other options here, and again, some of you may be familiar with what's called the SPI method, the service provider invoice. With E-rate, with E-rate, it's up to the applicant to choose which method they want to use. All right, with the SPI method, that's where if, let's say your discount rate, your E-rate discount rate is 80%. So the vendor, okay, traditionally they would bill you your 20%, then it falls on the vendor to file the SPI, the service provider invoice, to get the balance at 80%. We will be able to use a SPI method with ECF, even though 100% of the cost is being covered, but it's a conversation you'll need to have with the provider. All right, where under E-rate, it's the applicant's choice as to which method. With ECF, the service provider can say, no, I'm not doing that, all right, and no harm to them, all right, it's going to be their choice. My understanding is there's going to be a place on the 471 where you're going to indicate your preference, all right, and then you'll also have to show the service provider's willingness to file the SPI. So whether it's something you're going to have the vendor sign off on, all right, but again, they're not required to honor the SPI method. Now, for deadlines, if you go ahead and you purchase the equipment, all right, we do have a very tight bear deadline as far as filing for the reimbursement. It's 60 days from the purchase. All right, so if you purchase the equipment, if it's delivered, then you have to show, because it's going to ask, the date. 60 days from that date would be the deadline for the purchase. Again, it's this very short turnaround because they want to make sure, are you utilizing all the funds that you requested? Now, if this is for that monthly recurring cost, all right, that maybe you already have in place for those existing hotspots, you can treat it like we do with the current bear. It's up to you, if you want to pay that monthly recurring cost for the full 12 months, and then after the 12 months, file a bear and get all of that, reimbursement at one time. You could file the bear quarterly. You could do it every 6 months. You can do it monthly. All right. Again, how quickly do you want that those funds coming back into the library system? All right, but if you're paying the monthly recurring, then it's 60 days from the last date to receive service, which would be June 30th, 2022. That would make the deadline August 29th, 2022. All right, but again, a shorter time frame to get the to file for the reimbursement. Another difference when you go to file this form, the current bear form, you just say, here's the amount that we paid for the equipment. Here's the amount that we paid over the 12-month period. Here, this new form, there'll be a place where we'll need to basically upload the invoice. That's our understanding right now. One other requirement here, and a lot of libraries have already done this, that in order to receive this funds, because the way it's coming through the Treasury, federal funds coming from the Treasury, that you have to register at sam.gov. All right, so SAM is the System for Award Management. It's a web-based application. Now, I had provided on my website a kind of a guide to step you through this, and they have now changed the site, okay? You can go in and create an account for yourself if you don't have one already, and there's no harm setting up the account. I created one the other day, but once you have the account, then you can go in and search the records, all right? You can search by your DUNS number, all right, to show you, do you currently have a SAMS code? And if you do, when's it set to expire? All right. Now, with the SAMS code, our understanding is you do not have to have this code in order to file the ECF Form 471, all right, to request those services. But you have to have the code in place when you go to file the BEAR form for the reimbursement. All right, so it's a good idea while we're kind of waiting on these forms, go in, do you have a SAMS code? If not, apply for one. If you do have one, check to see when it's set to expire. All right, and if it expires before June 30th, 2022, I would suggest that you go in and renew it. All right, I will be working on some guides, like I said, because the system has changed, to step you through the process in my free time. Okay, so that will be coming. Okay, I'll take a deep breath here first. So let's talk about Cipa compliance. In the ECF order, there was information there giving us clarifications on Cipa, the Children's Internet Protection Act, that also will impact E-rate. Right, so these Cipa requirements, this is a Cipa thing. So any program that that requires Cipa, here are the rules. And Sandra, one question here, please remind me one more time, can I use this reimbursement for recurring costs for hotspots that we already circulate? Yes, you can. All right, so if you already have those hotspots that, that individuals are coming in, patrons are signing out, yes, you can use that for that recurring cost. And clarifications, yes, so.
Sandra, that reimbursement actually would be for the services going forward. And hang on a minute until we get into the Cipa discussion, because that may or may not be relevant.
Correct. Thank you. Yes, because for some of you, this may not, you may not qualify. All right. So in order to receive the funding, all right, same thing with E-rate, you have to be Cipa compliant, but we'll explain how this works and some clarifications. All right, so according to the order, Cipa applies to the use of any computer owned by a school or library that's receiving ECF and or E-rate. So if you send a computer home with the library patron, then it must be filtered if receiving ECF and or E-rate. Right? So what this tells us, it really comes down to who owns the end user device as to whether or not you have to be Cipa compliant. Right? And Dawn, stop me if I misspeak. I'm giving the same information that I'm giving the schools. ALA may have a different approach. All right? So please correct me if needed. Right? So Cipa does not apply if you're not applying. Just to make this clear, if you're not applying for ECF or E-rate, then you don't have to be Cipa compliant. You're not getting the funding, so you don't have to be Cipa compliant. And Lisa, your question, is this true even if the computer was purchased with library funds? Correct. It comes down to who owns that device. All right, so if you used other library funds, okay, to purchase a tablet that a patron sends home, all right, the library owns that. So it has to be Cipa compliant, all right, if you are receiving ECF and or E-rate, right? Now, the third bullet here, Cipa does not apply if the computer is owned by a student or library patron, even if the library supplies a mobile hotspot and receives ECF or E-rate. So the clarification that we've received to date, okay, is basically, we cannot require an individually, a privately owned computer, laptop, tablet, whatever, to be filtered, right? We cannot require that. So if the library or the school does not own that laptop, or tablet, even if you're sending home the hotspot, right, then you are not required to filter that end user device. That's our understanding right this particular moment. Don, is that your understanding?
Yes, that is absolutely the understanding. Computers that the library owns must you have to be Cipa compliant. And sometimes when we're talking about this, we're talking about two different things. When the schools talk about Cipa compliant, and pretty much all the schools certify every year that they are compliant with the Children's Internet Protection Act. Libraries, only about 70% of you do. That's completely up to you. I don't want you to hear any kind of judgment in that at all. But if you are one of the libraries that does not certify that you are Cipa compliant, I advise you not to try to thread the needle on this of, well, you know, we bought these computers. You own the computers. The rule is, if you own the computers, you have to be Cipa compliant for this. And the services, even if the hotspots are sent home and used by the patrons, if you want to use funds, E-rate or ECF, depending on which apply, to pay for that service, certifying Cipa compliance is necessary. Now, the services sent home to the patrons, used by the patrons and not by library computers, doesn't have to be filtered. But for the purposes of getting this, the library does have to file the paperwork saying they are Cipa compliant, which means that access in the library for the library computers is filtered. Is that your understanding, Lori?
That's my understanding.
Yes.
And you know, when I have this conversation with schools, all schools, to my knowledge, I don't know of any school district that does not filter. Okay, where, as Don mentioned, that, you know, about 70% of the libraries have indicated that they are Cipa compliant. Okay, so if you are receiving E-rates, let me back up. So if you've indicated that you're not Cipa compliant, then you basically you're saying that you're not filtering. They're on site.
Right.
Right. Make sure I said that correctly. So if you are asking for, if you are Cipa compliant and you are asking, you know, they're on the library site, and you're asking for ECF just for the hotspots, you're not going to be sending tablets home with patrons. You're just asking ECF to cover the hotspot cost. All right, then you do not have to filter those hotspots that patrons are taking home. Okay.
Right. But
okay.
there's some sort of doubt among the community, and the question is so narrow that I'm not getting anyone when I've been trying to get an answer to it to even like understand that this is a distinction, because but the gist of it does seem to be, no, if you do not certify as a library that you filter on site, certify Cipa compliance, say with us annually, then you're purchasing hotspots to send home hotspots to send home. They don't have to be filtered. You can purchase the hotspots. That's fine. If you try to get ECF for that service, however, to pay for the monthly fee for the hotspots, there's some doubt about whether you need, as a library, to certify that you are Cipa compliant. And then that gets into the whole services out of your building decision and internet access policy within your library. Probably best that I have this conversation directly with you if you have questions about it, than trying to kind of lay all this out. But Lori, do you mind if I go through the questions that have been coming in based on Cipa?
Yes, please.
Okay. Dr. Johnson, Thomas, just to clarify, if we receive ECF funds for this effort, Cipa will not apply. That is too reductive. I can't say that. It depends on what you're receiving the ECF funds specifically for. But again, if you're using the ECF funds to purchase the hotspots, no, Cipa does not apply. If you are purchasing devices, by that tablets and laptops, I get it that, you know, by definition, a hotspot is a device, but we're focusing here on tablets and hotspots, basically things with a client internet browser, I think is what we're focusing on. Those, yes, you're purchasing them, and Cipa does apply. Fred Miller Jr. asks, should our library system be filtering our hotspots that we lend out to our patrons with ECF? No, the hotspots do not have to be filtered that you're lending out to your patrons. Right, Lori?
Correct. If you're just lending out the hotspots, does not have to be filtered.
Right. Cheryl asks, so for item number 3, we can request ECF reimbursement for the hotspot service reoccurring cost. Yes, you can. It is easier if you, I think that if you certify that you're Cipa compliant, even though the hotspot service that the hotspots that you're lending out do not need to be filtered. But again, I think in order to get ECF reimbursement for that, there's some question about whether you need to be filtering in your library, right, Lori?
Correct, because, and again, you know, we're still waiting to see what the final, you know, forms look like.
And again, this comes down to an audit. You
Correct.
know, you know, I'm not going to say you're Cipa compliant because no one's ever going to come looking and making sure that all of your filters are, like, you know, all of your computers are filtered all the time. It could happen. So I'm just going to leave it there. Deanna, so hotspots do not need to be filtered if a patron is borrowing the device to use with their own device. Yes, that is correct. That is absolutely correct. Yes. We do not have to filter patrons in their home. Watch all the porn you want. Ron Wood, so if I'm understanding this, if I loan a patron a hotspot, but the patron owns the computer, I don't have to filter. Correct. However, if the patron borrows both a computer and a hotspot from our library, we would then have to filter and be Cipa compliant. You would have to be filtered and be Cipa compliant in your library. Right, Lori? In
the library, but the, and this is where it gets really into the weeds, even more so. So you would have to filter there at your library, but also filter that laptop or tablet that the patron is taking home with them.
But not the hotspot.
Correct.
Right. The service doesn't have to be filtered, but the computer that you send on it would have to be.
Correct. So basically, if that patron, you know, is sitting down at that library-owned laptop or tablet and try to get into, you know, some explicit site, it would need to be blocked. Wherever.
Dr. Thomas, you say this makes sense. It really doesn't, but I appreciate your vote of confidence.
Yes. And that's why I took a deep breath when I got to the slide. Like, okay. and say this makes sense. It makes sense as much as it can possibly right now. But this is what we know. Many of you know that, you know, for years I've worked in the IT field, and we used to have the old joke, you know, as quickly as technology would change, you know, an operating system gets updated or whatever, and maybe today the functionality, you know, isn't there. Tomorrow that might change. So the old joke was, you know, how do you know when you're lying to someone? You know, comparing it to, say, someone who, pardon me, sells, you know, used cars. At least the used car salesperson knows when they're lying to you. Okay, so as I know right now, I don't think I'm lying to you, but that may change tomorrow.
If you have questions based on kind of that you want to do computers and you're kind of wondering about the logistics of how do we filter the device, but not the hotspot that we're lending, do contact us at Oakland. We do provide Cisco umbrella services for all the library systems in Ohio. That if you want to use it, we're providing it. And since we're paying for it, I'd love it if you used it. But we don't require you to, and that could be an option for a way that you can filter the device, but not the hotspot itself.
And I see Jen had a question there, Jen Sloan, that it goes without saying that offsite access points will need to be filtered, correct? That is incorrect, all right? So again, the hotspot itself would not have to be filtered if you're only sending home the hotspot, all right?
Yes, the answer is no, yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see, any other questions here? So Deanna's comment question, we do not have E-rate now, but we do filter in the library. We have our own Chromebooks that we now loan out. Do they need to be filtered if we're not covered by E-rate? If they're not covered by E-rate and you're not applying for ECF, then you're not required to filter. All right, it would just come down to if you decide that you're going to apply for ECF, you know, say if you're also sending out hotspots, if you're going to ask ECF to cover any portion of the cost while patrons are using those Chromebooks that you own, then you'd have to be Cipa compliant. And again, I hope that makes some level of sense. Don, I'm reading through some the additional questions. And Cheryl, your question or comment, will this be clarified when the filing window opens regarding Cipa compliance? I certainly hope so. The reason this is kind of a sticking point, and we discussed this on the call we had yesterday, that through the E-rate process, we have to file what's called a Form 486. That's where we indicate our Cipa compliance. So our understanding right now is if a library has a 486 filed for this upcoming, or will have a 486 filed for this upcoming window, this upcoming funding year, I should say, apologize, this upcoming funding year, that if you've already filed a 486 or will be filing a 486 because of your E-rate application, then USAC's going to look at that to see whether you're Cipa compliant. The question right now is, well, what if I've not filed my 486 yet because I've not gotten my E-rate funding letter, or I don't apply for E-rate, all right? Then you would have to make certification on this ECF form. So that's where we're saying we hope clarification, you know, once those forms become available. All right, so again, hope that helps. All right, so let's continue on. And thank you for your patience with this. So a little bit of additional information here. So ECF is subject to the same document retention period as E-rate, all right? So it's subject to the 10-year retention. So, you know, invoices, you know, all of that documentation you have to keep for that 10-year period. All right, we know that there will be certifications. Oh, I apologize. Forgot to turn my phone off. I do apologize. All right, so we know that there will be a certification where we have to certify that this is not a duplication of service. All right, meaning that you're asking ECF to cover something that you're going to have some other fund cover. All right, say some other federal fund. Now, the gifting rule, there is an exemption, all right, for items providing remote learning. So, you know, if a provider is giving you a free hotspot under normal gifting rules, that would be a violation. all right? But we do have this exception that if it will, whatever that item will promote remote learning or remote access, not a gifting rule exemption. Just keep in mind though, if a vendor comes to you and gives you, offers to give you tickets to a sporting event or whatever, to choose them as your vendor, that is an issue, all right? If it's not supporting remote learning, that gift, all right, would be an issue. Now, once you file the 471, if you do get a denial, then you can file an appeal, just like we do currently in the, within the E-rate rules. But again, that very short period of time. If you receive a funding letter, it's been denied or some portion's been denied, you have to file the appeal with USAC within 30 days, right? Moving forward, updates will be provided as information is received. All right. Once we do have access to the actual applications, I will be setting up training sessions similar to what I do now, where I step you through, this is how you file a 471. It's going to be, similar to that. All right. So once we have, where I can do a screen capture of the forms, I'll get that training scheduled. So Don, you and I will work together to get that set up. All right, so we've talked about items that are eligible for ECF. I do have to point out some things that are ineligible, all right? And this is stated, there's an appendix within the order that clearly states this. So administrative costs, personnel expenses, if you're going to pay a consultant and, to file these forms for you, those costs are not eligible under ECF. The second one is a little strange. Because I get this question a lot from schools. If you already have those Chromebooks and there is a license, for that Chromebook, if it's a separate cost for the license, ECF will not pay for that. All right. But if it is something where that license is just rolled in to the cost of the Chromebook, right, then that is eligible. As long as there's not, if a vendor gives you a quote that says, here's the cost for the device, let's say the tablet, $300 and $30 per month is for the license. If the cost is broken out, so in this example, that $30 license fee would not be eligible. If they said, here's the cost for the device and it's $330, then that should be fine. As long as the license cost is not separated out. Backup power equipment, if you're sending home, sending with the patron a backup battery, a redundant power cord, right, not eligible. Cybersecurity tools, like the filtering cost, is not eligible. Filtering costs are not eligible under E-rate, also not eligible under ECF, right? If we do wind up having a second window where the retroactive purchases, become eligible, it would have to fall within that March 1, 2020 date through June 30th, right, 2021. Right. So in any additional components to go along with that laptop or tablet, a headset, if there's a standalone microphone, those would not be eligible, to purchase a mouse pad, a laptop bag. All right. Those additional add-ons would not be eligible. Technical support, Zoom license. All right. So any related software subscriptions. Again, ECF would not cover those costs. Now, in the meantime, we do have links for, this is just a very, basically long document of tables. If you want to go in and see what fields are going to be listed on these new applications. Now, the Office of Management and Budget, we did find out yesterday that OMB has approved, the requested changes. So that's where USAC is now working on creating those forms. All right. But if you, in the meantime, if you do want to pull up these documents, we do have a table showing a document showing what the 471 will ask. It will show what the reimbursement form will be asking. There's also the post-commitment change request. There will be a mechanism for that. similar to what we have currently under E-rate. So, if you ask for 500, specific make model of a Chromebook, and then when you're ready to order, if you've gotten your funding letter and you realize that specific model is not available, where you can say, I want to go with this model instead. All right, so there should be this post-commitment change request mechanism in place. All right, so next steps, determine your need. That's going to be the most pressing right now. Be prepared to explain how you determine that. Now, for libraries, you need to include a statement, it could be in your acceptable use policy, explaining that the ECF equipment or service is intended only for patrons who do not have internet access sufficient to meet their needs. All right, so basically that statement, and then, patrons sign that. And Cassandra, your question, do they have to prove their need? No. Our understanding is just by virtue of them, them signing off saying, yes, I understand, and that this is based on need. Them signing off to that statement is adequate, right? That's our understanding today. Some available resources. All right, Don shared the one for ALA earlier. My website, again, presentations are out there, that prioritization list, and trying to keep that up to date. And then here's the link for the Connectivity Champions. Again, go to their site. They have lots of different resources out there for this EBB assistance, flyers that you might want to access. All right, so again, that's available out on their site. And Rushma, your question, is this for circulating laptops, et cetera, or also for hotspots? Make sure I understand. This would be for the circulating laptops and for the hotspots. All right, if you're asking about as far as determining needs and signing off. If the patron is checking out a device that's being funded by ECF, all right, then that policy would have to include that language. And as far as the patron signing a form at every checkout, I don't think that's required, but again, I don't know for sure. If you can show that, in an audit situation that you had an AUP where this individual signed off on it, just like you have them now sign up on an AUP, they do not have to sign that AUP every time they come in to check out a device, correct? So that would be my understanding here. Okay, but excellent question. All right, so I think you all know where to find me. I am not running and hiding yet. It's going to be a crazy summer for all of us. All right, thank you, Carrie. But again, please don't hesitate if you do ask questions, or if you do have questions. I may not have the answer. I made the comment to one of my sessions the other day, do you have any other questions I cannot answer today? So we'll get the answers as soon as we can. And let's see, Michelle, your question about keeping the forms for 10 years, that's our understanding. All right, as far as that document retention. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for staying with us all. I should have known this would be longer than an hour, so we're coming right up on the 90-minute mark. But Lori and I will hang out here for a little bit longer in case anything occurs to you. I'm going to shut off the recording now.